Um, the Russians handed, I mean, there's politics at play here. There's no doubt about this. First of all, I don't believe that the Russians expected the Ukrainians to accept this. In fact, I think the Russians knew the Ukrainians would reject this. But the Russians were prepared to go forward with this. We know this. This is an absolute certainty. There's another element to this that nobody's talking about. Putin has said that this will be that the peace will be based upon the Istanbul Communique, modified to reflect the present reality. And the present reality is that Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk are Russia and will forever be Russia. And there's nothing that can change this. Nothing. Um, Ukraine needs to accept this reality. Now, it didn't have to be this way. If Ukraine had accepted the um, April 2022 Istanbul Communique, Kherson and Zaporizhia would be Ukrainian. And the Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk, would be independent pending a referendum by the people conducted under international auspices to determine what their future would be. So Ukraine opted out of this. The West opted out of this. They chose war. Um, and now there's some people out there saying, yeah, but Russia hasn't really advanced. Russia's killed 500,000 Ukrainians. Russia has destroyed the Ukrainian economy. Russia is destroying Ukraine. What do you mean Russia hasn't done much? Russia's job was never to conquer Ukraine. Never to conquer Ukraine. So those people who put out there, well, Russia has failed to conquer Ukraine, have no clue what they're talking about. Russia's job has been to secure Russia. Russia is defined by more than just the borders of the Russian Federation. In a speech dating back to 2005, April 2005, I believe, Vladimir Putin, speaking to the Federal Assembly, spoke about his responsibility as the leader of Russia, the Russian nation, and the Russian nation is comprised of the Russian people, people who share a common language, history, culture, religion. And Ukraine is full of the Russian nation. Now, Russia was willing to have the Russian nation live under the sovereign control of Ukraine. Those Russians who lived in Ukraine would live in Ukraine. Russia's always been supportive of that, but not when Ukraine launches a frontal attack against the Russian nation, the Russian people, the Russian language, the Russian culture, the Russian religion, which Ukraine has been doing for decades since the nationalists came in power through the Orange Revolution in 2005. The world tends to forget this, what Ukraine, modern Ukraine, is about. It's about the Western empowerment of ultra nationalistic trends in Ukraine to achieve the stripping away of Ukraine from the Russian sphere of interest, from the Russian orbit. Notice I didn't say strip it into the West, because Ukraine will never be part of the West. I don't know how many times I have to tell this to the Ukrainians out there. The West doesn't want you. The West doesn't like you. The West despises you. You're not one of them. You will never be part of the European Union, ever. They keep talking about meetings to talk about bridge, about the framework of the possibility of considering sometime in the future, if, when, it will never happen. You are a tool being used by the West to achieve a strategic outcome that involves the defeat of Russia, not the embrace of Ukraine. But the Ukrainians have been captured by this ultranationalism that dates back to, pre-World War II, Stepan Bandera and people of his ilk, and ultranationalism that is premised on the notion of some sort of racial supremacy in Western Ukraine. They are superior racially to everybody else. The Russians are subhuman. The Poles are subhuman. Everybody's subhuman except the Western Ukrainians. And this is what has seized power, and it's perverted everything. It's perverted how the West views Ukraine. The notion of the United States Congress, to show you the Jekyll and Hyde nature of the U.S. Congress in 2015, passing an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that says that U.S. taxpayer money cannot be used to fund training for the Azov Battalion because they are neo-Nazis and white supremacists. They sustained this argument, this line of thinking, this amendment up until 2022. After that, they just stopped talking about it. But now they've gone the other way around. We're going to fund the Azovs. We're going to fund the Nazis, but they're not really Nazis, you see. They're Ukrainian nationalists who've been fighting the Russians and the Soviets. They're anti-communists. That whole Nazi thing, that was just because they had no choice but to hang out with Hitler and the boys for a couple years, because what were they supposed to do? They live in a tough neighborhood. You know, you got a bad gang, you got a bad gang, pick a bad gang, join the bad gang, fight the bad gang. No, that doesn't work. That's total revisionism. Banderism has always been linked to Nazi Germany. The Nazi Germany, the fascist ideal, has always been at the soul of what the Banderas stand for. And yet that's the ideology that's at sway today. The United States Congress is supporting this. These are the realities that people have to understand when assessing what Vladimir Putin has put on the table in terms of this peace offering. It's not really a negotiation. The negotiation's already been had. That negotiation took place in good faith by the Russians back in the spring of 2022. That's when they sat down with the Ukrainians and tried to hash out a peace that, frankly speaking, when Vladimir Putin released the document and I read it, I was shocked that that is what the Russians would put on the table, because there's not anybody outside of Vladimir Putin's inner circle that would have put that down. All the Russian experts I know, and I consider myself, well, maybe not a Russian expert. I don't want to elevate myself too high. I'm a specialist. I've been studying Russia for a long time. I've been studying Vladimir Putin for a long time. So I thought I had some insight into how this guy thinks. I was dead wrong. He is a far more pragmatic, responsible leader than even I thought, and I'm somebody who called him a pragmatic, responsible leader. This is a man who was seeking genuine solutions to an extraordinarily difficult problem. This is a man who was not seeking to take a pound of flesh from the Ukrainians. He was seeking to do that which he said back in 2005. I am the president of all Russia, and I'm here to protect the Russian people. And when the Ukrainian ultranationalists, empowered by the West, started to commit cultural genocide against the Russians, and then after 2014, actual genocide against the Russians, he had no choice but to step in. But even he, when he stepped in, he sought peace. What do you think Minsk was all about? In 2014, 2015, he didn't need to choose peace. He had actually surrounded the Ukrainian army in Donetsk, could have killed them all. He's there for the Russian people. The Ukrainians, empowered by the West, started confronting. So I thought that he would have been far more harsh on Ukraine than he was. But the terms of peace were extraordinarily reasonable. And it's still on the table today. That's what I don't think Ukraine and the West are quite comprehending, that this is the last great gift that Vladimir Putin can give them, the gift of a genuine peace that respects the existence of a sovereign, independent Ukraine. Yes, they can't be a member of NATO. They're never going to be a member of NATO. And whether they join the EU, that's an issue for further discussion, but the EU doesn't want them. We'll never have them. Ukraine, whether they know it or not, belongs in the Slavic orbit, the orbit of Belarus, of Russia, of Ukraine. Ukraine belongs in the Eurasian orbit. They're not a European power, never have been. And you know, that's their future, but that's a future that the Ukrainian people need to figure out for themselves. But they're not going to be part of NATO. Russia will never allow that to happen, can never allow that to happen. And we know why, because the West doesn't view Ukraine, again, they're not seeking to invite Ukraine into the member of the community to do this, that, and the other thing. They're using Ukraine as a base of operations to create the conditions for the strategic defeat of Russia. That's it. So Russia will never allow it to happen. Now, it's been made clear to the Ukrainians that if they reject this, as they have, and it's also made clear to the West that if they reject it, and they will, we see a NATO summit coming up. I mean, the timing of Putin's, statement before the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was genius, a pure genius, and it disrupted this peace conference, showed it for the sham that it is. And it'll totally undercut what's going on in NATO as they try to figure out how to justify spending hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild a military that can't be rebuilt to confront a threat that doesn't exist. But then what will happen is that Russia will destroy Ukraine. And as they've said, the next time they talk, it will be unconditional terms of surrender. And that's the future. And those terms will be harsh. Right now, Ukraine will lose Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk. The next time Russia talks to them, they're going to lose Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Mykolaiv. And if they want to keep talking, Russia can keep moving. Sumy, that can go. Geneva, that can go. How far does Ukraine want to go? How far do they want to take this? If they turn this down, Ukraine will cease to exist as a modern nation state. When they lose access to the Black Sea, which they will lose when Odessa becomes a Russian city, and Putin has already said Odessa is a Russian city, but he's putting a marker on the table. It can be a Russian city under Ukrainian sovereignty, as long as the Ukrainians respect the Russians that live there. But Ukraine, right now, as it's currently configured, can't respect the Russians that live there. They've launched a frontal assault against the Russian Orthodox faith. They've desecrated extremely religious sites, holy sites in Kiev and elsewhere. They're attacking the Russian language, even in Odessa as we speak, a Russian city where Russian language is prevalent. Anybody who speaks Russian is being arrested and prosecuted for the crime of speaking Russian. This is unacceptable. Russia will never allow it. But if they lose Odessa, they lose access to the sea. If they lose Dnipropetrovsk, they lose industry. Mykolaiv, they lose industry. Kharkov, they lose industry. They've already lost the heart of their industry in the Donbass. So what's left of Ukraine? A dysfunctional agrarian rump state. That's it. And it will fester and suffer, and eventually it will have no choice but to seek to join the Slavic Union, and it will do so probably alongside elements of Moldova, which will break free. But they will always be minor components of this. Right now, Ukraine could become a major component of the Russian Union. But the nationalists won't let them. The West won't let them. The West is not letting them because they're defending Ukrainian democracy, Ukrainian sovereignty. They won't let them because Ukraine is a tool. And the West is going to get all the bang out of this tool they can. They've invested hundreds of billions of dollars into this tool. This tool needs to perform. But the tool is broken, and like all broken tools, the cost of fixing it is too high, so it will be discarded. And that's the future of Ukraine, to be discarded on the trash heap of history. They have one chance to avoid that, accept the Russian peace proposal. So far, it looks like they're not.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think these conditions that Putin put out before the summit in Switzerland was so important. He wanted to influence this summit. And what came out of this summit, Scott, was Russia is named as the culprit of the conflict in Ukraine. They're talking about that Kiev should regain control of Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. And with the current situation, do you think is that possible that Russia gives the control of these power plant that Ukrainians were attacking viciously during this, at least last year? And how do you see the outcome of this summit in Switzerland? How practical is this summit?
Nima, next week I'm holding a summit here in New York. You're invited. It's about going to Mars. And we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about going to Mars. I'm building a spaceport in my backyard, and I want you to help me design a rocket. We'll invite Larry Johnson, all your guests. We're all going to sit down. We're going to talk about it, and then we'll meet for a week, and then we'll put out a press report about how we're going to go to Mars and all the things we're going to do. How realistic is that concept of me going to Mars? I mean, it's not very realistic, right? Fantasy. That's the entire Switzerland summit. It's a meaningless event. It cost a lot of money to bring people together to say things that have no bearing whatsoever on anything. If you think Vladimir Putin sat up and listened when, Giorgia Meloni, breathlessly talked about, we're going to avoid the surrender of Italy's been next to Ukraine all along, and Putin's, oh my God, Italy's next to Ukraine. It's over. It's over. Belarusov, it's over. Surrender now. Gerasimov, throw down your weapons. It's done. Italy is with Ukraine. Who cares? No one cares. Not in Russia. Lavrov doesn't care. Lavrov said the West doesn't matter. I don't care what the West thinks about Russia. The West has made itself irrelevant. There's nothing the West can do except commit suicide. And they can't even do that well. It's going to have to be an assisted suicide by the Russians. It's like, come here, let me hold your hands. Let me show you how it's done. Nuke, 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 nuke. It's so pathetic what happened there. Literally, parse it out. Nothing happened there. Nothing. Was Joe Biden there? I will always stand with Ukraine, except when Ukraine hosts a peace summit, and I won't be anywhere near there because I got to go stand on a stage at some fundraiser and look stupid while Barack Obama leads me off the stage because my brain doesn't work anymore. They sent Kamala Harris. She got there and took one look at it and said, I'm out of here, Jake Sullivan, you got the show. And Jake Sullivan was there going, well, we promised we're going to be around, but we can't keep that promise. So America will never stand next to Ukraine. No one stands with Ukraine. No one stands with Ukraine. No one stands with Ukraine. No one. Nobody. Not a single one of those nations that signed that. Even stupid Trudeau. Slava Ukraine, what a idiot. I mean, the stupidity of that and the emptiness and it exposed the vacuous nature of the entire collective West. This was literally a showcase of stupidity. It accomplished nothing. It's the laughing stock of the world. Not one serious thing come out. Yes, they write money and they threw money at Ukraine like they always do. I mean, I guess you could call Zelensky the greatest fundraiser that ever existed, but that money doesn't translate into anything but dead Ukrainians and tragically dead Russians too. It means dead people. People always talk about, U.S. dollars, as dead presidents. Going to stack the dead presidents. Well, we give enough dead presidents to Ukraine, they'll stack dead Ukrainians because that's all it's good for. Nothing good will come out of this. The other thing people aren't picking up on, I have, because like I said, I may not be a Russian expert, but I watch them pretty closely. And Putin has been very, very quiet about dates, calendar events. He doesn't like to put a calendar to things. And others have, and I've been listening to them, and people were saying, this May would see major changes on the battlefield. By the end of summer, we would see the collapse of the Ukrainian military. But Putin came in and he said something very interesting. He said, we could do that. Because remember, the guys I was looking to were military guys, and they're like me. I mean, give me a military mission, I'm going to accomplish it. I mean, we're going to go forward. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to close work. We're going to destroy. And I'm going to kill you all. You may kill a bunch of my guys too. That's the way war goes. But I will win because I'm better than you. I'm going to. And then the Russians are looking at Ukraine saying, we could do this. The Russian military saying, we can do this. And Putin's saying, yeah, but at what cost? Well, it's going to cost us. Do we want that? Why do we want to do it now? Well, because then now's the favorable time. We can get in there and do this, that, and the other thing. By the end of summer, he's going, but what's the rush? What's the rush? My economy's doing okay here. It's actually doing quite well. The more I produce, the further ahead I get of the West. The more I produce, the more the West becomes dysfunctional trying to figure out how to deal with what I'm producing. I'm in a good place. The West gets weaker every day. We have BRICS coming up. BRICS is pushing us in a better position globally. What's the rush with Ukraine? Why are we rushed here? Why do I want more dead Russians? And he's lost a lot. Putin said something very interesting, that the irretrievable loss balance is 5-1. So if we're talking 500,000 dead Ukrainians, that's 100,000 dead Russians. In 10 years in Vietnam, 58,000 dead Americans broke the spirit, broke the back of America. In less than 2.5 years, Russia's lost 100,000 men. Putin, it hasn't broken their spirit. The Russian nation has rallied around him, but Putin understands the responsibility on his shoulder. It's the outcome, not the calendar, that counts. Right now, Ukrainian energy is at 23%. It ain't going to get any better. It's going to get worse. By the time the summer ends and the Russian aerial campaign finishes, they'll be down into the teens, the low teens, maybe even single digits in terms of electrical generation capacity. And then the winter comes. That'll be the end of Ukraine, the end of Ukraine. Zelensky, the Russians have put a whole bunch of effort into delegitimizing him. I mean, Zelensky's a self-canceling fool for not holding an election. And he can pretend that he's the president, and the West can pretend that he's the president. But as Putin said, when we negotiate with Ukraine, we're not negotiating with him. There's somebody in Ukraine that's constitutionally empowered to do this. It's a clever game that Putin's playing. You see, he also said that Russia's not going to be the one to get rid of Zelensky. America is. And it'll probably happen sometime in the spring of 2025. Now we have the first time that Putin put a calendar event down there. Because if the implication is that America will remove Zelensky in the spring of 2025, the implication is the war will still be going on at that time. And so now we're beginning to see the game that Russia's playing here. It's a longer game. People like me, again, look, I'm an analyst. I go with the data I have and the perceptions I have, the prejudice and the bias that I have. I have always said that Russia isn't going to play the long game. It makes no sense for Russia to play the long game. The Russian economy couldn't sustain the long game. Russian defense industry would be lapped by the West. That the West was so competent that we could get our defense in order. Da, 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 da. I was wrong. I'm admitting it right now. Wrong. The West doesn't have its act together. The West can't get its defense industry up and running. Not in a time frame that's compatible with what the Russians have done. The Russians have lapped the West. The Russia is out there eons ahead of the West on defense, and their economy is functioning. It's doing well. It's growing, and BRICS is going to make it grow even more. Russia's in a good spot. Russia can wait out the West. The West is collapsing as we speak. They just had an election in Europe. Macron's, old little Napoleon wanted to go invade Ukraine, and the French voters said no. And so now he has to have a parliamentary election. And if the opposition party, the right-wing party of Marine Le Pen, takes control, unless she becomes another Giorgia Meloni and says one thing, does another, it's over for France. They're not going to be able to do anything in Ukraine. And we're seeing throughout NATO, it's over. Germany, they can't do anything. They don't have a military. Nobody has a military. America doesn't have a military. We don't have anything. Nothing that can do what we claim we want to do. 500,000 men ready to fight. What? Who can pay for that? We can't. Europe can't. So Russia knows this. And so Putin has just basically said, guys, turn Ukraine into a death trap for Ukrainians. Kill them all the soldiers. Grind them down. If they want to surrender, capture them. Otherwise, grind them down to nothing. And if the West wants to throw more money into the pit, let them spend that money. It just weakens them even more. But this is ultimately a political game. And this winter, Ukraine will break because there is no power. They have no heat. They have nothing. It's over, and Putin knows it. So why do you need to, they have some good leaders right now in Russia. One thing this war has done is expose the peacetime guys who are very good at putting on a uniform, sitting behind a desk and signing papers and looking very important. But then the war came, and they turned out not to be very good at moving troops around and all this stuff. And a lot of them were corrupt. We're seeing them get arrested now. We're seeing them purge. He just did another purging of the defense ministry now. He's getting rid of the stultified, calcified old way of being. He's bringing in new blood. A lot of them are financially oriented because Putin's been cleaning up the finances of Russia, and he left the military out there thinking that they were getting their job done because, of course, the military full of great patriotic people. It turned out that most Russian military are great patriotic people, but it turns out there's a bunch of those guys who weren't great patriots. They were taking advantage and enriching themselves. And now they're being purged. And the generals that bought into that system are being purged. And the people that have proven themselves on the field of battle, fighters, warriors who know how to fight, they're being promoted. And those guys are like, we can do this. We can finish this job. And they can. They can. But Putin doesn't want them to die. I keep, well, if they're dying, Scott, does that mean they're winning? The bloodiest month for the United States in World War II in the Western theater and the European theater of operations was April 1945, when the war was lost for Germany. The bloodiest month was the last month. Why? As we were pushing forward aggressively, the Germans were defending. They weren't going to win, but they defended nonetheless. Just because Ukraine has lost this war, and they have lost this war, it doesn't mean they don't know how to fight. It doesn't mean they won't defend. So rather than play their game, come in and fight them and root them out, Russia will win, but Russia will suffer horrible losses. Rather than do that, make Ukraine play the Russian game, which is the meat grinder game. Russia played it at Bakhmut. Russia played it at Avdiivka. Russia's playing it now, north of Kharkov. It's the meat grinder game, where Ukraine throws resources into the fight, desperation. And then Russia will open up another front in Zaporizhia, and Ukraine will have to send troops down there. And if they can't block them, Ukraine will have to withdraw, create more opportunities, and Russia will take more troops in. Russia has, there was some reports saying Russia has 700,000 troops in special military operation. I actually believe they have more when you add up all the troops. I'm still continue to say that Russia's sitting on 250, 300,000 troops in the area of operations. They haven't committed to the fight. And when they start committing these troops to the fight, and they start stretching Ukrainians, then Ukraine will break. They will break. And that's when you start doing more aggressive operations. That's when you start pushing them back. But the Ukrainians are incapable. I mean, it's just their mentality. They're incapable of going over on the defensive. They should have done that a long time ago. Go over on the defensive. They should never have done that counteroffensive. They should have created mobile groups, compel the Russians to go on the attack, then counterattack viciously when the Russians attack. Russia, may not be in the position it is today if that's what the Ukrainians did, because that truly would have become a bloodbath for Russia. And whether or not Russia would have been able to overcome that, we don't know. But Russia is looking at the nature of their enemy, and they say, all we have to do is wave a red flag in front of them, and like the bull, they will charge. If the enemy's that predictable, you advance in the Kharkov, you seize terrain that's beneficial, you dig in. Everybody's like, why aren't they advancing more? Wait. Here comes the Ukrainian bull, kill them all. And that's what Russia's doing. It's the way this war is going to be fought, and it's the way this war is going to be won. And it's frustrating for the West because, Russia also, they know the political pressure the United States is under, coming up on an election season, and the artificial expectations that will be put on the Ukrainians to do something. Why do you think Ukraine threw all their reserves into Kharkov leading up to this peace summit? They wanted the dramatic victory. What happened? All the reserves died. The meat grinder. Ukraine will be compelled to do something similar leading up to the NATO summit. You've got to show us you're winning. You got to show us something on the battlefield, just like they did last year. You got to attack the Russians, even though you don't have the troops trained properly to do it. You got to do it. They did, and they all died. They'll come up with something. They'll be compelled to do something leading up to the NATO summit, and they'll all die. But eventually run out of people to kill. The Ukrainians have a manpower problem, huge manpower problem. And so, this war will go on a pace of Russia. I think any Western analyst that can sit here and say, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to predict this. I'm going to predict. I think we should have learned our lesson by now. And I count myself in that number. I'm not predicting anything except a Russian victory. When they're going to win, how they're going to win, that's up to Russia. I don't get to make those decisions. Like I said, I have a very aggressive military mind. I look at potential on the battlefield. I can tell you right now that if America was sitting in Russia's seat, we'd be fighting this war differently. We would knock the Ukrainians out of this war this summer, but we'd lose a lot of guys doing it. Russia's decided they don't want to do that. Russia's decided that's not in their best interest. That's a Russian decision that's attached to economic reality, political realities. Putin has the mandate right now to do whatever he wants to do. He won a big election in March. He's cleaning house right now. Actually, in many ways, this war empowers him, because it creates a sense of urgency that can't be ignored. It creates a sense of prioritization that allows him to clean up old school corruption throughout Russia. So why, if you have this empowering device, it also solves the NATO problem. I'm just telling you right now, NATO is over. NATO is finished. It's over. Ukraine destroyed NATO. And if whether NATO lasts for another 10 years, 15 years, who knows? But NATO is finished. It's also destroyed the European Union. The European Union's finished. Fracturing already. It's done. So you're Vladimir Putin. You're sitting there in Lavrov saying, yeah, the European Union and American, competitive thing, it's sort of weakening now because of the war. And Putin's like, and you want me to end this war? You just told me that this war is weakening the West. And you want me to end this war right now? Hey, military, how's that NATO competition thing going? Well, NATO's overstretched. They can't afford to. Why? Because of the war. And you want me to end this war? You guys realize how stupid? Hey, Minister of Economy, how's our economy doing? Booming. Why? The war. And you want me to end the war? Oh. FSB, you're cleaning up corruption throughout there. Why? Because the Russian people are ready for a cleaner way. Why? Because they're focused now on what it means to be Russia. Why? Because of the war. And you want me to end the war. You want me to end the one thing that's enabling me to get Russia positioned to be stronger than ever. I can't say that's what Putin's thinking. But I mean, logically, it's got to be in his mind. Let's let this thing run its natural course. If the war's solving all my problems and it would cost me too much to bring this war to an end, let's manage this war. Let's ride this thing out and emerge from it in the strongest possible position, foreign policy-wise, economically, militarily. Russia would end the war today if Ukraine said so. They would. And Putin would throw away all these advantages that he's accruing because he does want peace. He does want peace. But if the West doesn't want peace, if the West chooses war, it only strengthens Putin across the board. So, yeah, I'm in the let Vladimir Putin decide when Russia's going to end this war and just enjoy the ride. Now, it's not my job to pretend that I'm a Russian general and look at the map and start drawing imaginary red lines. Not my job. It's an exercise in futility because this war is an extension of politics, and Putin is a master politician. And we don't know because he very rarely talks about these things. And when he did, but lately he has started hinting about these things. And it shows that at a minimum, this war is going to extend through into the spring of 2025. Because this war is about the removal of Volodymyr Zelensky from office. And he said, Russia's not going to do that. America's going to do it. And they're going to do it in the spring of 2025. Boom. It's the biggest indication of the direction this war is going. And what happens between now and the spring of 2025? The winter of 2024, 2025. And Ukraine is not in any position to survive this winter. None. It will break Ukraine. And I think tragically that's what Russia's looking for it to have happened. They've offered them a way out right now. Take peace, avoid being broken. If Ukraine doesn't want peace, that's their problem. That's Zelensky's problem. It ain't Putin's problem.
When Putin has put out these conditions, preconditions for the peace talks, right after that, Lloyd Austin said that Putin has no right to do that.
Who cares what Lloyd Austin thinks? Who cares? No one cares. Not even America. Americans don't care what Lloyd Austin thinks. We don't care what Biden thinks. We don't care what Sullivan thinks. We don't care what Blinken thinks. We've not only made ourselves irrelevant to the rest of the world, we've made ourselves irrelevant to the American people because we continue to say stupid things. And the American people are going, what does that mean, Lloyd Austin? Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt your question, but I mean, what? Go ahead, finish. Sorry.
Yeah. No. And the problem is, Scott, nobody is taking serious what Putin is talking about, because I think it's so serious, it's so important what he's putting out right now. And just a former Ukrainian politician, Viktor Medvedchuk, he said that Putin's peace initiative is the last chance to preserve the Ukrainian state. I think he's talking about Kiev. If this war goes on and on, Russia can take Kiev, and that would be the end of Ukrainian state. How do you find this type of comments?
I mean, I've spoken to former Ukrainian politicians who have gone over, former prime ministers, former parliamentarians who are now in Russia, advising the Russian government. They've all said the same thing. It is what it is. What we already talked about it. If Ukraine will no longer exist as a modern nation state. How that gets parsed out, again, the danger of predictions. We don't know what the intent of Russia is regarding Kiev. I think it's more likely Russia would put a puppet government in that, and Kiev would remain part of Ukraine than have Kiev become part of Russia. But again, I don't know. I don't know what the Russians are thinking. As for the West, they're grossly irresponsible in how they're handling this. They believe that Russia is bluffing, and this creates the potential for extraordinarily dangerous situations. Putin's not taking the bait. That's another, frankly speaking, surprising thing. I know I'm coming off as a sort of a guy who is starry-eyed for Vladimir Putin, but he just continues to impress me more and more as this conflict goes on. He always impressed me as a strong leader, a capable leader, a man of vision, got his country out of the 1990s, got it moving on this trajectory. But when he, at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, chose to sidestep the provocations of the West when it came to Western weapons, we're giving Ukraine permission to green light, use these weapons to strike Russia. I sat there and said, this is it. This is the final red line. Russia can't back down from this, that this is it. Russia will have no choice but to. And Putin came out and said, well, if you're going to do that, then I might provide weapons to other nations so they can attack you. And I went, whoa, you just, because we talk about the escalation ladder. And I've been looking at an 8-foot ladder. And I've been saying, we've gone up to it. We're at the 6-foot mark on the 8-foot ladder. And I just, when the West did that, I said, that's it. We reached the top of the escalation ladder. Boom, it's all over. I was very worried, very concerned about the real potential for nuclear war. I still am, because it's there on the table. Russia's doing its exercises. Stoltenberg's talking about we have to make our nuclear arsenal. NATO's nuclear arsenal is 100 American bombs, by the way. NATO doesn't own them. America owns them. Stoltenberg's an idiot, but that's another discussion. I thought of it, but what Putin did by doing that is he just turned that 10-foot ladder into a 15-foot ladder, which means if we're at the 8-foot mark, we're just a little bit halfway up now. He just bought time. He just basically said, and notice again the sequencing of it, because again, unless I'm just totally wrong about Russia, and everything I've ever learned about the Russians is wrong, and I leave that open. That could be a possibility. I've been wrong about things in the past. I don't think I'm wrong on this one though. Words matter to the Russians. I mean, that was a lesson taught to me by a Russian diplomat back when I was a UN weapons inspector. And we would say things about Iraq. We would say things about international cooperation, and sometimes because of our frustration about the lack of compliance on the part of the Iraqis, we would allow our emotions to get the better of us, and we would say things. And I remember this very good friend of mine. He pulled me aside whenever we wanted to have a serious conversation. He said, "Scott, we must go to the bar and drink Guinness." Oh, shoot, we're drinking Guinness. That means it's a serious conversation. And we'd sit down there and we'd pour the Guinness and we'd have this. But he was like, you have to watch what you say, because words have meaning. When you say something and then you fail to deliver on that, or you fail to act in a way that the words suggest you would act, it discredits you. It's a very valuable lesson, one that I haven't heeded as frequently as I should, but it's still in the back of my mind. Words matter. So, and it's a Russian. And this is a guy who is IMGIMO trained UN, Russian diplomat. That's the elite foreign service school for them. He is trained the system. He's in the system. And that's the way all of Russia works. Words matter. So, and it's not just the word, it's the sequencing of the word, the prioritization of the word. When Vladimir Putin chose to close the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum with a lengthy discourse on the Russian economy, it was a signal to the Russian people and to the world, even though the world wasn't listening, that Russia's not looking for war, that Russia's focus is the future, is the economy, economic expansion, BRICS, economic health, etc. Then he brought in at the end the issue that everybody was worried about: confrontation with the West, war, nuclear conflict. And he de-escalated it brilliantly. He just went, well, no. And then later on, he had a meeting with international reporters, and he said, and we haven't. I think the reporters. The meeting with the reporters is where he said, well, we can give these weapons out there. And everybody's like, well, has Russia already given the weapons away? And then at the plenary, he said, we haven't made a decision yet. Meaning they didn't even go up a scale. They just basically said, build the ladder higher. Good. I like it there. We haven't decided if we're climbing the escalation ladder yet. We're chilling out, seeing what you guys are going to do. But no panic. No panic whatsoever on the part of Putin. Words matter. He's not seeking conflict with the West. The West doesn't know how to respond to this, because the West is programmed to believe that the West is, of course, the exceptional reality in the world today, that only the West point of view matters. And we believe that we're indispensable, that, when we speak, Russia must listen. Well, Russia doesn't care anymore. Lavrov said that. Putin has said that. Russia just doesn't need the West, doesn't need them, doesn't want them, doesn't want to destroy them. Putin said, what idiot came up with the concept of us advancing on Europe? We don't want that. We don't want that at all. But the idea that Russia now has to listen to what Lloyd Austin says, that Russia has to listen to what anybody in the West says, When the West starts speaking, words matter. When the West starts saying things where the words have substance, Russia will listen. But right now, the West has forgotten. They've been so irresponsible with their language that their words now just become easily brushed away notions because they don't matter. They're not serious. Whereas when the Russians speak, the words matter. They're real. But the West doesn't believe that. They think Russia's bluffing. They think that Russia's posturing. There's a little bit of posturing there. Everybody postures. Russia's not bluffing though. But Russia doesn't need to back up the West's continued bad behavior with military force. They prepare, they train, they position. But as I said, Putin is looking at this war and he's saying every month this war goes on, NATO gets weaker. Every month this war goes on, Europe becomes less and less relevant. Every month this war goes on, America becomes more and more isolated in the world. Every month this war goes on, Russia becomes more relevant in the world. And so the West can say whatever they want. Russia's made a decision that the West doesn't matter, that Russia will execute this war on a timeline that best suits Russia's interests. So Lloyd Austin can say whatever he wants. Russia doesn't care.
When you look at the European Union today and considering what has happened during these new elections in the European Union, there are people that are thinking that these are new changes that are happening in the European Union that would change the idea, the policy in Ukraine. But with Meloni, we saw the same thing. It doesn't matter who comes into power in Europe. And whenever you have right wing, left wing, all of them are the same type of policy when it comes to their policy toward Ukraine. How do you see these changes? In France, they're talking about right wing coming and they may change the policy in Ukraine. Do you see that coming, or is the same old policy, the same old game that we saw in Italy?
Ultimately, in nations that are ostensibly democratic in nature, um, bad policy equals bad politics and it equals bad results at the polls. So the politicians get punted. See all my, like that alliteration, all my P's put there. I thought I was being clever. But the point is, um, you know, politicians in a democracy do at the end of the day have to appease the population. And then when if you can sell Ukraine to a population as a as this I won't say theoretical, but this amorphous notion of doing good. We're doing good. We're doing good. We will support you doing good. But do I still have gas affordable at the pump? Am I being flooded with immigration? Do I have, is my cost of living going up? Can I heat myself in the wintertime? Because when you start dealing with reality, this amorphous, oh, we're doing good in Ukraine becomes irrelevant, especially when all the money that could fix some of these problems at home is being instead handed to the Ukrainians, and you're being told to continue to be doing good to the Ukrainians. We have to take even more money and build up things that don't matter. I mean, that's the reality. As long as segments of the European population believe that they don't pay a major price personally to feel good about Ukraine, they'll support the feel good about Ukraine. Because again, I come down to it. Ukraine doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's just a stupid concept that Europe's created and they put it up there. But the Ukrainians, the Europeans don't care about Ukraine. Hell, they're starting to kick the Ukrainians out. They're tired of the Ukrainians. All those refugees that came in, freeloaders living off there, they're tired of the Ukrainians in their homeland. Get them out of here. Send them home. I mean, so there's no concept of, Europe is fundamentally committed to Ukraine, that it's an existential issue. No, it's just a amorphous feel-good issue. Um, but the population, once it's public opinion is like a giant ship. Have you ever been on a cruise?
Yeah.
You cruise. Okay. You know how as the ship's coming into port, I mean, it's just a big ship and it's moving in there. It doesn't steam in and slide it. It slowly comes in and you slowly decelerate because it's moving.
Mm.
And it's the same thing when it leaves. It moves slowly and a tug pushes it here and there. Then it gets out on the big sea and it slowly points in the direction once it goes and it goes. But it's not sitting there zigzagging. It's momentum. Public opinion is like momentum. And to shift it, you've got to start moving it here, got to bring in a tugboat here, you got to get the engines to back down. But once you get it moving, it doesn't stop on a dime. And so all these politicians have put so much into public opinion moving towards supporting this amorphous idea of Ukraine that it can't be stopped on a dime. But what you're starting to see is the captains are saying they're going to kick us out of this bridge here. We're not going to be running the ship anymore. Hey, Tug, move it this way. Get the engines down. Let's start slowing this baby down. Let's get it moving in another direction. But it takes time. This election sent a huge signal to the captains on the bridge that they'll be fired and a new captain's going to be put in if they don't begin to move away from this Ukrainian thing. It's becoming a problem for them because it is consuming resources that aren't being replaced otherwise, and it's having an impact on the lives of the average Europeans. And in France, this is a big deal. I mean, I don't know. Macron has called for snap elections. Now, why would he do that? Because Macron cares about the French people? He doesn't. Macron is hoping that he can go in and convince enough people in France not to allow this party to be empowered within France. That it's one thing that they're going to be in the European Parliament and doing all this, but France cannot be captured by these people. So it's a gamble on his part. He's hoping that he will be able to win over, and it's not a stupid bet. Macron is still the president. He's safe, and he controls a lot of levers, so he can go in there and do things to try and influence domestic politics so that he preserves his base of power. And then we find out how important the Ukraine issue really is, because like I said, it's not that important of an issue for Europe. It's a made-up issue. It's fake. He's not going to run on, I believe in Ukraine. We must sacrifice for Ukraine. Trust me, this election is going to be more about, what's good for France, France's leadership role in Europe, things of that nature. So it's all a political game right now being played. But I do think that the unity that France or that Europe keeps talking about doesn't exist when it comes to Ukraine, and it doesn't exist when it comes to a unified economic position. I mean, they keep buying Russian gas and oil for a reason, because they don't have an alternative plan. I mean, the ability of Europe to self-destruct continues to amaze me. Sanction Russia, but keep buying their oil and their gas. Keep coming up with loopholes to sanctions. There's no unified posture. One nation does one thing, another does another. Then there will be fractures. I think the elections, the European Parliament elections, were a warning shot. It doesn't achieve the fundamental redirection of Europe, but it's a warning shot that the liberal elites, political elites, and economic elites that are in charge right now, that the people are losing faith in their ability to lead, and that they are starting to look for alternatives. And in nations like Germany, the alternative for Germans, they have to, it's that's real. Marie Pen's an alternative now in France, and you're seeing the rise of alternatives throughout Europe. That's what I think this is. It's not the end of Europe. It's the beginning of the end of Europe.
I think the crucial question would be how would be the life of Europeans without Russia? And there is a report in Financial Times. It says that Russia overtook the United States as gas supplier to Europe in May. And we know that how dependent Spain is on steel and iron of Russia. And just Germany that is talking about fighting Russia by 2029. They are importing increasingly fertilizers, Russian fertilizers. In these 2 years of the conflict, it was increased by 9.2 times. It's unbelievable how dependent, how important Russia is for Europe. At the end of the day, you see all the calculations on the part of the European Union. It doesn't seem to consider the fact that is there, that is inside their economy.
Europe is dysfunctional. Every European nation is dysfunctional. European Union is dysfunctional. Words matter. And you expose your weakness by articulating aggressively anti-Russian position that is immediately undermined by the reality of your actions. It means that your words don't matter. Yeah. Europe has become an institution that doesn't matter because their words have no meaning. None.
Sergei Lavrov was talking about a symmetrical response to what the United States is doing in supporting Russia's enemy. And when they're talking about a symmetrical response, do you consider it where is it going to be? Is it going to be in the Middle East with Houthis? Is it going to be in China with Taiwan, the situation with Taiwan, in Syria, in Africa? What they're talking about, what would be the priority for them, in your opinion, if they go that direction?
Well, it's an asymmetrical response, not a symmetrical response. If it's a symmetrical response, it's very easily predicted, cause and effect. This is asymmetrical, which means we don't know. That's the beauty of it. It means that you hit them where they're not expecting it. You take advantage of weaknesses. If they choose to stack their chips here, you stack your chips here, or you stack them here. That's the thing. The idea isn't to match strength with strength. The idea is to put your strength where they have no strength. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be, I'll give you an example. It's an underreported story. We know that Russia has taken advantage of movements in the Sahel and West Africa to see the eviction of France. And France has largely been evicted from Africa. There's a few holdouts, but the long-term prognosis for France and Africa is not good. Sudan, Russia was courting President al-Bashir before he was removed in a coup. And then, the Russian position became rather weakened as the United States courted the post-Bashir government, taking them off the terrorist watch list. And the purpose of all this was to, isolate Russia, to deny Russia what it wanted, which was a warm sea port on the Red Sea. And the Russian military, had to take, a step back. And in the vacuum, Wagner Group came in and started making economic alliances with the non-U.S. supported groups in Sudan, the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, Rapid Response Forces, or Rapid Support. I don't know, but it's Hemeti is the general. And now there's a civil war between the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces. Now, Wagner, of course, has been eliminated. It's been retooled into something they call the Africa Corps, and it works directly for the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense has taken advantage of Wagner's, connectivity with, for instance, the Central African Republic. They continue to work there in Mali, and the inroads they were making with Burkina Faso and with Niger. Um, you know, that's all good. But in Sudan, the Russian Ministry of Defense reversed course. They didn't build on the relationship with the RSF. They went back to the Sudanese government, and they're in the process of negotiating a deal where Russia is going to provide significant quantities of weaponry and assistance in exchange for what they always wanted, that port on the Red Sea. This the African continent is becoming a Russian continent, and not as in an imperial standpoint, but the influence that Russia has on Africa now is tremendous from a security standpoint, from an economic standpoint. South Africa is a member of BRICS. Egypt is moving in that direction, and you're going to see more and more. Russia working with Africa to make the African continent more relevant as an African continent, not as an outpost of American global hegemony or neo-colonial European recidivism. And this is what's happening in Africa. Russia is and this is asymmetric. Nobody predicted this. If you had gone out 5 years ago and said Russia's going to control the African continent, U.S. Africa Command, which was stood up so that America controls the African government, was said, no, we will never allow that. We are going to do this, that, and the other thing. U.S. Africa Command just had to withdraw their forces from Niger. They got no place left to go. They got nothing. It's a command of nothing. Meanwhile, Russia controls the African continent. How? Asymmetric response. That's how the Russians operate. And the Russians will operate this way. The key thing about asymmetry is that it happens without you knowing that it's happening. And by the time you realize that it's happened, it's too late. It's already happened. So I can't sit here. See, if I could sit here and point and say, well, Russia's going to do this, that, and the other thing, that means it's a predictable outcome based on cause and effect relationships. That becomes symmetrical response. That's not what Russia said. They said it'll be asymmetrical. You're not going to know it's happening until it already happened and the outcomes that Russia wanted have been achieved. Russia has taken control of Africa. Russia will take control of the Middle East, not control in the old American hegemon fashion, control in the Russian fashion, meaning that they've made America and Europe irrelevant, and they've made Russia and its allies, China, relevant. That's what asymmetry means.
What's happening?
You're not going to see a paper. You're not going to see a paper on it written by the Russians and say, this is what we're going to do. That turns it into a symmetrical response. Asymmetrical means what? Who? Me? It's sort of a, Mad Magazine back in the 70s and 80s, Alfred E. Newman. Who? Me? That's the Russian response. That's what asymmetry is. Who? Me? No, I'm just out here doing stuff. Oh, you lost Africa. Welcome to asymmetry. Oh, wait. You're panicked now because we put 2 ships in Cuba. 2 ships in Cuba, and America's panicked. Welcome to asymmetry. That's what's going on here.
What's happening right now in Cuba, if you consider it as a response from Russia. The Russian warship and U.S. submarines, I think 2 submarines are there in Cuba. Andrei Martyanov pointed out that there are 2 submarines in Cuba. How do you see the situation in Cuba? Is that serious or is nothing of concern?
It's asymmetrical, which means on the surface, it's not that serious. It's 2 ships, 3. If Andrei's right, and I have no reason to doubt him, 3, plus a tugboat, plus so 5 Russian ships. Man, that ain't even a carrier battle group. We deploy carrier battle groups all over the world, 10 ships, 12 ships, American fleet, moving. Here come the Russians, it's a Corvette with some missiles on it. They happen to be Zircon missiles, which are hypersonic and they can have nuclear warheads, although the Russians say there's no nuclear warheads on them. Don't worry about it. We're not here threatening you. But it is a threat because as they sail off the coast of the United States, if they decide to fire, 7 minutes later, the President of the United States is dead. Decapitation. I think they took the Kazan, which is the name of their big missile submarine boat, and they took it out there and sort of disappeared. from the radar for a minute. And the Americans were going, where are they? Where are they? Now, that could be a lie. The Americans may be going, we know exactly where it is. And the United States surfaced a submarine off of the, off the Russian fleet, which we never do, but it surfaced up to say, here we are. We're tracking you. We know who you are. We're not incompetent when it comes to this sort of thing. But, the point is, America's response required us to move more resources in to respond than the Russians were expending. That's the definition of asymmetry. I spend $5, you spend 50. Who's going to go bankrupt first? Well, the guy spending $50. So that's what it is. The Russians are just sending this thing. It's not the first time they've done this. They've sent. I think when the Admiral Gorshkov, I think that's the name of the ship, when it first got commissioned, it sort of went on a world tour. And I think for a while it cruised off America's coast, and American, oh my God, they got a Russian ship. Well, the beauty of what Russia's doing here is, see, we do it all the time. Americans just don't pick up on it. But, we always send missile carrying destroyers and cruisers into the Black Sea, and they're sort of floating off of critical Russian military facilities with missiles that can reach out and touch them. And it makes Russia very uncomfortable to have American missile carrying ships that close to strategic targets. Very uncomfortable. So I think this is Operation How Does It Feel? So the Russians are just basically saying, hey, yeah, that Black Sea thing, how does it feel? When you guys do that B-52 thing in the Baltics, where you bring that B-52 down and you're sort of threading the needle coming in towards St. Petersburg, flying that missile release platform profile, and then at the last second, when you could release the missiles, you peel off, and you make us all get a little nervous about it because we don't know, is this it? Is this the preemptive nuclear strike that America is going to do? Well, we're going to put some Tupolovs in Venezuela, and they're going to fly similar profile missions against you guys. How does it feel? How does it feel to have Russian bombers coming in that could have, you don't know, do you? They could have a whole bunch of nuclear tipped cruise missiles in there. You don't know, do you? And they're coming at you, getting closer to your shore. Oh my God, you don't know what the hell the Russians are going to do. And then they pull away. How does it feel? How does it feel? Bob Dylan should write a song about it. He could call it Like a Rolling Stone, and the refrain could be, how does it feel? Oh, he already did that. So that's what the Russians are doing here. Just giving the American their own medicine. It's asymmetrical because Russia isn't spending a lot of money to make this happen, but the results, the bang they're getting for their buck is worth the cost of the deployment.
But the other thing that would be the use of nuclear weapons, as I think it's much more important, much more serious when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine. Shoigu recently was talking about the use of tactical nuclear weapons in response to Kiev attacking civilian facilities. He said that would be an appropriate response to Kiev if they do that. How do you see the risk of having the use of tactical nuclear weapons or even escalating to some sort of nuclear war?
This is an extraordinarily dangerous situation that we're in because for decades now, Russia has de-emphasized tactical nuclear weapons. The Russian posture was, we have nuclear weapons purely as a deterrence, that if you attack us, either nuclear or conventionally, in a manner that threatens the existential survival of Russia, we have nuclear weapons that will respond. As Putin famously or infamously, depending on your point of view, said, we know what that means. Yes, we will go to heaven, but we will go to heaven as martyrs. You will go to heaven as the guys who started a nuclear war. So for the Russians now to be talking about tactical nuclear weapons, the implication there is that Russia is not going from 0 to 60, that Russia is actually going to have an intermediate step in there. It means that the Russians have taken a look at NATO and the United States, and they've made a determination that there's an opportunity here, that if provoked, Russia can use tactical nuclear weapons against a European target. They're not going to hit Ukraine. I mean, again, I'd be surprised with you, but I don't think they're going to hit Ukraine. Why would they? It's a Slavic country. They're going to hit the people that provided Ukraine with the weapons.
The bases in the European Union?
Screw the European Union. You're going to hit Europe.
Europe, yeah.
European
The
Union.
bases, I'm talking about Romania, Poland.
France, Brussels, decision-making centers, England. Yeah, they're going to hit Europe with nuclear weapons. And you already have, you have influential people, not in the government, because again, Vladimir Putin doesn't release the minutes of the meetings where they talk about this. But, it's frustrating for me because I've been promoting the return of arms control. I've been saying, why don't we get back to the spirit of the INF Treaty and all that stuff? And the Russians are like, no, we're not going to do that, because nuclear weapons have become essential to their survival. But now Russia's basically saying we can hit a European target as a sign or symbol, or a warning to the West. Boom, you just lost a European city, and we can take out a whole bunch more, and we will. We're ready to take out a whole bunch more. But now you guys know what reality is. You think we're bluffing? We just took out a city, Poznan, Poland. It's gone. Oh, I'm sorry, America. You had 30,000 troops there. They're gone too. Shouldn't have put them there. Shouldn't have allowed that base to be used to attack us. But now they're gone. Boom. Biden, you want to lose Boston? Because shut up, Biden, or whoever's talking for him, because you're a senile old man. Shut up, sit down, because if you make the step, we're going to take out Boston. We're going to take out. You want to lose Boston? Explain that to the American people, why you're willing to commit suicide for the Poles or for the French or for the Germans who allowed their weapons, not as a NATO policy, as an independent sovereign policy, because that's what we're talking about here. The Germans aren't saying this is NATO policy that the Taurus missile go in and hit. The French aren't saying it's a NATO policy. It's a French policy. France said, we are big enough to do this. You're not. Boom, you just lost Marseille. You want to lose more French cities? We can take them all out all day long. How do you want to do this? Oh, yeah, by the way, and if you guys want to do it again, we'll escalate to the big show, because we'll go to heaven as martyrs. You'll go to hell as the people who create the conditions for the start of a nuclear conflict. This is dangerous because the Russians now are acting as if there will be an intermediate step. Now, one can call it building, extending the escalation ladder. That what Russia's doing is rather going to immediate global thermonuclear war, everybody dies. Russia's saying, no, we're going to call your bluff. We think you're bluffing. We don't think you're willing to commit suicide for the stupidity of Macron, who's sitting there saying he's going to do this, that, and the other thing, that there will be consequences. Those consequences will be nuclear in nature. Boom, you just lost a French city. What are you going to do about it? I don't like this talk. I respect the Russians' right to create the, after all, the United States is the one that, after 9/11, decided that we're going to reconfigure our nuclear posture so that we can use nuclear weapons anytime, anywhere, without any nuclear-related justification. Hell, we can now attack you if you put a cyber attack on us. The Trump administration, and I just want all the people out there who think that Donald Trump is the savior who's going to save the world. Remember, it was his arms control official and his nuclear posture planners who said the goal of the Trump administration is to have the Chinese and Russians wake up every morning not knowing whether or not this is the day the United States is going to nuke them. Does that sound like rational thinking? Does that sound like sanity? Now, if you're the Russians and the Chinese going, that's crazy. Yeah, but that's the guy speaking who's in the administration, speaking on behalf of the president. So you can't sit here and say Vladimir Putin is now grossly irresponsible. No, the gross irresponsibility is on the part of the West that's created the condition where this becomes a possibility. America would not sit by and allow nations to fire missiles into America, threatening our nuclear. We said that if you launch a cyber attack that threatens the command and control of our nuclear enterprise, we will respond with nuclear weapons. A cyber attack. And yet France is talking about letting Ukraine use French missiles to hit strategic sites inside Russia. Are they insane? And the answer is yes, they are. And so the Russian response is, rather than go from 0 to 60, complete thermonuclear war, they now are saying, no, we can use tactical nukes. And when they say we can use, because remember, we come back to that fundamental thing, words matter. Listen to the Russians, people. Listen to them. This is not a conversation we should be having. This is what should generate Europe to say, downshift, slow, shut up, Macron. This is where leadership, American leadership, Tony Blinken should come, Biden, if he had the mental capacity, should come to France and sit down with Macron and say, the next time you utter a word about sending people to Ukraine, I'm going to pull my ambassador out of France and I'm going to sanction the living crap out of you because I'm not letting you commit suicide for my people. It isn't going to happen. You don't have the capacity to do that. You're only doing that because you think I back you up. I don't back you up. And I don't back you up in the strongest possible terms. So don't do it. Shut up. Stand down. It's done. England, sit down. Shut up. You don't matter. Anybody who's talking about attacking strategic targets in there, it's done. Ukraine, don't even think about it. Find a way to get to peace. If you can't find the way, I'll find the way. All right? But this war's over. And notice there's not a single threat to Russia. See, Trump's like, I can end this war today by picking up the phone and threatening Russia. No, you can't. But what you can do is sit down and tell the Europeans, it's over. The notion that you're somehow going to confront the Russians with a strategic victory, we're over it. We recognize that that commits suicide. We're done. You need to be done with it as well. And Ukraine, find a pathway to peace or we'll find it for you. But you never did matter, by the way. But we're going to give you one last chance of pretending that you matter. Find a way out of this or else we'll find it for you. But we're done with this war game because we don't want nuclear war. We don't want nuclear war. It's not the outcome we want. We've painted ourselves into a corner right now where it becomes increasingly the likely outcome. That means we need to stop because it's not what we want. We can't do it. Can't afford it. It's not desirable. And that's what we should be doing. But we're not. So now we've created a condition where the Russians are saying, America, if you won't stop your European poodles, we will with a nuke. And what are you going to do about it? And that's a question I don't want answered. I don't want the question asked, but I definitely don't want to find out what the answer to that is because the answer is probably America will respond with a nuclear weapon and then we all die. And this is the point I try to paint to the Russians all the time too, that you know what the outcome is. You guys are smart enough to know what the outcome is. You know, you're hoping that it's a bluff. I can't tell you for certain because I'm not in the decision-making circles, but my assessment of the American decision-making circles is it's not a bluff. And we will then hit you with a small nuclear warhead, but it'll kill a Russian town, Kaliningrad. Say goodbye to Kaliningrad. There it goes, boom. Now what do? Oh, they hit Kaliningrad. We're going to stop. No, you're going to take out Boston. Then they're going to take out St. Petersburg. Then you're going to take out America. They're going to take out